Commander Drake, they're tearing physics apart. What are your orders? Lieutenant Thren's words cut through the crackling tension of the command deck, her tone sharp enough to slice metal. Commander Alaric Drake stared at the distorted image on the laser plasma display, his gray eyes narrowing as he processed the chaos before him. On the screen, the dying star churned like a wounded beast, its light consumed by shifting tendrils of living void. Space itself rippled unnaturally, as if reality had been bent by an unseen hand and might snap at any moment. "Hold formation," Drake ordered, his voice steady, though the weight in it silenced the murmurs of the bridge crew. "Focus all sensors on that thing. I need every fragment of data. And somebody find me a weakness." Around him, the air was taut with the electric tension of imminent catastrophe. The dim lighting of the command deck pulsed red in sync with warning signals, painting the crew in harsh shadows as they worked feverishly at their consoles. The atmosphere smelled faintly metallic, like overworked circuitry, as the ship's systems strained to cope with the gravitational waves hammering their shields. Ahead of them, the alien fleet, what little remained of it, was scattered like debris in a cosmic hurricane. Ships buckled and disintegrated under the assault of the Void Eaters, their tendrils reaching out like a predator testing the air for its prey. The tendrils weren't just devouring the star's energy, they were consuming space itself, leaving behind a jagged absence that gnawed at the edges of sanity. "Sir, incoming signal," Thren called, her fingers dancing across her console. "It's the Icarial, last surviving ship from the Zexlar fleet." "Patch it through," Drake said, bracing himself. The screen flickered, and a desperate alien captain appeared. His translucent skin shimmered with stress, his form seeming almost fluid under the strain of his ship's failing life support. "This is Captain Savarn of the Icarial," the alien rasped. "We are overwhelmed. Engines are failing. Void Eaters have adapted to our weaponry. We cannot hold." "We're moving to assist," Drake replied, though he knew it was a calculated risk. "Transmit your coordinates." "They're everywhere," Savarn whispered, his large reflective eyes darting as if the Void Eaters themselves might step through the display. "Everywhere and nowhere. You can't—" The transmission cut to static. The screen returned to the swirling chaos outside, a graveyard of alien vessels, their destruction etched in sharp relief against the backdrop of cosmic fire. "Lieutenant Urel," Drake barked, turning to his tactical officer, "bring up the heads-up display. I want real-time projections of Void Eater movements." The projection flared to life, casting faint blue light across the tense faces of the bridge crew. It showed the Void Eaters as writhing clusters of energy distortion, their movements erratic and unnervingly organic. Drake's gaze locked onto the largest cluster, its tendrils moving in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. "They're hurting us," he muttered, like predators driving prey into a trap. A low murmur of unease rippled through the crew, though none dared speak. "Thren, open comms to the fleet," Drake ordered, his voice slicing through the tension. "All ships, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Keep shields angled toward those tendrils and don't engage unless fired upon. We're not here to fight. We're here to learn." A junior officer looked up from his console, his voice trembling. "Commander, what if they're learning from us too?" Drake's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure what they learn costs them dearly." The Stormbreaker surged forward, its reinforced hull groaning faintly under the strain of the gravitational surges. The bridge shook violently, and the acrid tang of overheating systems filled the air, drawing coughing fits from the younger officers. Thren swore under her breath, gripping the edge of her console to steady herself. "Report," Drake demanded. "Shields holding at 70%, Iril replied, his hands darting over the controls with practiced precision. "But these gravitational waves are unlike anything I've seen. They're not random. They're targeted." "Targeted?" Drake turned to him sharply. "Yes, sir. It's like they're probing our defenses, searching for a breach." Drake's mind raced. This wasn't just an anomaly or some mindless force of nature. The Void Eaters were intelligent, or something close to it. And if they were learning, it was only a matter of time before they found the fleet's breaking point. "Helm!" Bring us within 5,000 clicks of the Icarial's last position, Drake commanded. Tactical. Prepare countermeasures. Focus on anything that disrupts their movement patterns. Magnetic pulses, radiation bursts, even shock waves. Sir, getting close to that mess could rip us apart, Thren warned. Drake turned to her, his expression grim but resolute. If we don't get close, we're dead anyway. The only way to beat this thing is to understand it. And you don't understand the beast by watching it from a distance. You dive into its den. The bridge crew worked in near silence, the hum of their consoles replaced by the tense rhythm of fingers on keys. Outside, the Stormbreaker pushed deeper into the chaos, its reinforced shields flickering as waves of gravitational energy slammed against them. Void Eater tendrils approaching, Irel reported, his tone clipped. 2,000 meters and closing. Deploy countermeasures, Drake ordered. The Stormbreaker erupted with a barrage of magnetic pulses and radiation flares, each burst lighting up the darkness like a desperate cry for survival. The Void Eaters recoiled briefly, their tendrils twitching and retracting as if in pain. It's working, Thren said, a flicker of hope in her voice. Not for long, Drake replied, his eyes fixed on the display. They're adapting. Sure enough, the Void Eaters began to shift their movements, weaving through the countermeasures with an eerie fluidity. One tendril lashed out, striking the Stormbreaker's shields and sending a jolt through the entire ship. Sparks flew from a nearby console, and the metallic tang of burnt circuits filled the air. Shields at 50%, Irel shouted. Helm, bring us about, Drake barked. Keep those tendrils in our aft arc. Give Tactical a clean shot. The ship lurched as it turned, its engines straining against the gravitational pull. Another tendril lashed out, narrowly missing the hull, but leaving a trail of energy distortions in its wake. Commander, we're picking up an energy signature, faint but distinct, Thren said, her voice urgent. It's coming from deep within the anomaly. Could be a Void Eater core. Drake's eyes narrowed. Mark the coordinates. We'll come back for it once we're better prepared. Another violent jolt rocked the ship, and this time, several systems flickered offline. The deck plating beneath Drake's feet vibrated with the strain, and the acrid taste of fear was palpable among the crew. Commander, we have to retreat, Thren pleaded. Drake hesitated for the briefest of moments, then gave a sharp nod. All ships, fall back to Rally Point Omega. Full burn. The Stormbreaker turned and surged away from the anomaly, its engines roaring against the gravitational tide. The Void Eaters didn't pursue, but instead seemed to shift their focus back to the dying star, their tendrils continuing their inexorable feast. As the ship broke free of the chaos, Drake allowed himself a moment to breathe. But his mind was already racing ahead, piecing together what he had seen. The Void Eaters weren't just a threat. They were a puzzle. And if humanity couldn't solve it, the galaxy would burn. We've learned their first move, he muttered to himself. Now we plan for their next. Commander Alaric Drake stared at the heads-up display in the Stormbreaker's briefing room, his jaw set in a hard line. The projection of the Void Eater anomaly twisted and flickered, a cruel mirage of predatory intent. Despite the sterile blue light from the display, the room carried the suffocating weight of loss. Every chair around the steel briefing table seemed heavier, as if haunted by the specters of the crews who hadn't made it back. This was just a skirmish, Drake said, his voice clipped, deliberately devoid of emotion. They were testing us. Next time, they won't just probe, they'll consume. Then next time, Commander, snapped Ambassador Ilvar, his voice sharp and serpentine, you might consider not running headlong into certain death. His bioluminescent scales shifted in agitation, casting rippling green light across the room. Drake shot him a measured glance, cold enough to silence further remarks. Retreat wasn't cowardice, it was survival. The data we brought back might be the only reason the galaxy still has a next time. Assuming you can do something useful with it, Ilvar muttered, though quieter this time. Lieutenant Thren stepped forward, her boots clicking faintly against the reinforced deck. The commander's tactics saved half the fleet, Ambassador. Would you have preferred we stayed and been devoured alongside yours? Ilvar's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, retreating to the shadows like a predator licking its wounds. Drake turned back to the heads-up display, magnifying the sensor data they'd managed to pull from the anomaly. Lines of encrypted readouts scrolled down the projection, overlaid with shifting schematics of the Void Eater tendrils. Every flicker seemed like a taunt, as if the creatures knew they were being studied and found it amusing. "Lieutenant Ural, what do we know about their movements?" Drake asked. Ural leaned forward, the blue light catching on the tired lines around his eyes. "Their tendrils move with deliberate variation, almost like a hunting pattern, but here's the odd part." He tapped a button, zooming in on a segment of distortion. "When we hit them with magnetic pulses, they didn't just retreat. They regrouped. It's as if they were communicating." "Communicating how?" Thren asked, frowning. "Gravitational ripples," Ural replied. "They're using the fabric of space itself as a medium." The room fell silent. Even the faint whir of ventilation seemed to fade as the weight of Ural's words sank in. "Commander," Thren said softly, breaking the silence, "if they're communicating, then there's a central mind behind this. A hive or a leader." Drake nodded slowly. His gaze lingered on the projection, which now displayed the anomaly in its entirety, a vast, writhing web of darkness devouring the light of a star. "That's what I'm afraid of." A sudden chime interrupted them. The ship's AI intoned, "Incoming communication from the Galactic Council." Drake exhaled sharply. "Patch it through." The laser plasma display shifted, projecting the ornate council chamber onto the wall. The image wavered slightly, a reminder of the long distances their signal had traveled. Around the room's grand circular table sat the alien representatives, gas-borne creatures encased in shimmering containment fields, crystalline entities whose forms refracted the light, and armored insectoids with clicking mandibles. Each species bore the same expression of unease, though it manifested differently across their alien physiologies. "Commander Drake," said High Arbiter Syntha, her crystalline voice carrying an edge of barely concealed disdain. "You've brought us data, but at what cost? Entire fleets have been annihilated, and your so-called Deathworld tactics only barely managed to save your own." Drake's expression remained stony. "With respect, Arbiter, those fleets were annihilated because they relied on brute force against an enemy they didn't understand. My tactics ensured survival and retrieved vital intelligence. The Void Eaters aren't mindless, they adapt. If we don't, we'll lose this war before it even begins." "Survival?" Syntha's form shimmered red with irritation. "You fled." "We retreated," Drake corrected, his tone sharpening. "There's a difference. Would you have preferred I left no survivors to bring this data back?" A murmur rippled through the council chamber. Some of the representatives looked away, their postures tense. Another voice cut through the tension, low and resonant. "What does your data suggest, Commander?" The speaker was Counselor Tharun, a massive saurian alien whose deep-set eyes glinted with curiosity rather than judgment. Drake gestured to the display, and the image of the Void Eater anomaly replaced the council chamber. "We've confirmed that the Void Eaters communicate through gravitational waves. This means their attacks are coordinated. We also detected a faint energy signature within the anomaly, likely a core or central hub. If we can isolate it, we may find their point of origin." "And destroy it?" Tharun asked. "Possibly," Drake said. "But we'll need resources. Human ships can survive the conditions near the anomaly, but our weapons are inadequate against their adaptive defenses. We'll need your tech, shielding, energy weapons, anything that can give us an edge." The chamber erupted in heated debate. Some council members argued for immediate support, while others balked at the idea of handing advanced technology to a species they still viewed as primitive. Drake let the chaos play out for a moment before raising his voice. "Enough. This isn't about politics or pride. It's about survival. Every second you spend arguing is another system lost to these things. You called us Deathworlders because we were born in conditions you can't imagine. Let me remind you, that's exactly why we're still here. And it's why we'll win this war if you let us." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words hanging heavy. Finally, Syntha spoke, her crystalline form glimmering faintly. "Very well, Commander. You'll have access to limited resources. But understand this. If you fail, humanity will bear the blame for every world consumed. Drake met her gaze, unflinching. If we fail, there won't be anyone left to assign blame. The transmission ended, leaving the briefing room in tense silence. Thren exhaled slowly, running a hand through her hair. "You've got away with words, sir. I almost believed them myself." "Let's hope they did," Drake said, turning back to the display. "Because we've just been handed the tools for our next move." "What's the plan?" Iril asked. Drake pointed to the energy signature on the display. "We bait them into revealing more of their structure. If they're communicating through gravitational ripples, we disrupt their signals. And if there's a central hub in that anomaly, we'll find it." "And if they adapt faster than we expect?" Thren asked. Drake's gaze hardened. "Then we adapt faster." The bridge intercom crackled to life. "Commander, incoming long-range sensor readings. Void Eater activity detected in Sector 12. Drake straightened, his resolve solidifying. "Set course for Sector 12. Time to see how far their adaptation goes." As the crew prepared, the weight in the room shifted, not lighter, but sharper. The galaxy was on the edge of a blade, and for better or worse, humanity had been chosen to wield it. "Commander Drake, all ships are in position," Lieutenant Thren reported, her voice steady but carrying a tension that echoed through the bridge. "Good," Alaric Drake replied, his gaze locked on the laser plasma display dominating the Stormbreaker's command deck. The projection painted a surreal picture of their battlefield, a swirling storm of gas and debris encircling the colossal gas giant Arleth 9. The planet's roiling atmosphere churned in muted oranges and violent grays, its volatile storms licking out like eager claws. The Void Eaters had followed them, their tendrils stretching across the gravitational chaos like the limbs of ancient sea monsters, probing for prey. "Lieutenant Iril," Drake said without looking away, "deploy the lures." Iril's fingers danced over the console, and moments later, several bright orbs launched from the human fleet, their surfaces shimmering as they mimicked the radiance of smaller stars. The lures drifted toward the gas giant, their energy fields designed to simulate the output of organic ships. "Keep the fleet in low orbit," Drake continued. "No one fires, unless I say so. We let the lures do the work." "Void Eaters are responding," Iril reported, his tone clipped. "Tendrils shifting. They're tracking the lures." The heads-up display updated, showing the Void Eaters moving toward the decoys. Their fluid motions were unnervingly organic, as though each tendril operated with its own purpose, yet followed a singular will. The bridge was deathly silent, save for the sharp keystrokes of officers managing their stations. Drake's eyes narrowed. "They're too deliberate. It's more than instinct. They're observing." Thren leaned closer, her brow furrowed. "You think they know it's a trap?" "I think they're deciding whether to spring it anyway," Drake muttered. One of the junior officers at the rear console spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. "Commander, Void Eater activity is increasing near the anomaly's core. Should we adjust the formation?" "No," Drake said sharply. "They're reacting to the bait, but if we move now, we tip our hand. Hold formation. We need them closer." The bridge vibrated faintly as the Stormbreaker adjusted its orbit, the gravitational forces of Arleth the Ninth pressing against the hull. Outside the viewport, the gas giant's turbulent storms seemed almost alive, a fitting mirror to the battle unfolding within its shadow. "Lures entering effective range," Irel reported, tendrils converging, energy readings spiking. The Void Eaters began their approach in earnest, their movements shifting from cautious observation to predatory intent. The tendrils coiled around the lures, their dark surfaces rippling with unnatural energy as they absorbed the simulated emissions. For a moment, it seemed to work. The creatures were fully distracted. But then, as if realizing the deception, the Void Eaters paused, their tendrils unfurled, reaching outward in chaotic arcs that lashed through space. "They're scanning," Thren said, her voice tight. "They know." Drake's jaw clenched. "Activate the secondary decoys. Hit them with magnetic interference and pulse scatter." Another series of orbs launched from the fleet, releasing waves of distorted magnetic energy and radiation bursts. The Void Eaters recoiled, their tendrils flickering with agitation as they struggled to adapt. "Commander, tendrils are reconfiguring," Irel shouted. "They're targeting us now." "Prepare countermeasures," Drake ordered. "And get those shields ready. This is going to get messy." The Stormbreaker shuddered as the first tendril swept toward it, colliding with the ship's shields in a brilliant cascade of light and distortion. The energy surged across the bridge, the flickering glow casting jagged shadows on the walls. "Shields holding at 65%, an officer called out, his voice barely audible over the rising tension. "Maintain evasive pattern Theta," Drake snapped. "All ships, engage in defensive formation. No one breaks ranks." The battle intensified as the Void Eaters abandoned subtlety, their tendrils lashing out with increasing ferocity. Alien and human ships alike weaved through the chaos, their hybrid shielding systems straining against the relentless onslaught. Drake's focus was absolute, his mind racing to stay ahead of their enemies' unpredictable movements. He noted every shift in the Void Eaters' tactics, every ripple in the gravitational distortions. "Ural, what's the status on the gravitational disruptors?" "Fully charged, Commander," Ural replied, sweat glistening on his brow. "Then deploy them, and tell the fleet to get clear. This will get their attention." The disruptors launched in unison, their sleek forms trailing arcs of ionized particles as they hurtled toward the Void Eaters. Upon activation, they unleashed concentrated gravitational pulses, creating artificial anomalies that tore through space like invisible whirlpools. The Void Eaters reacted instantly, their tendrils writhing and retracting as the disruptors disrupted their movements. For a brief moment, they seemed almost vulnerable. "Focus fire on the exposed tendrils," Drake commanded. The fleet unleashed a coordinated barrage, kinetic projectiles and energy beams converging on the Void Eaters. Explosions rippled across the battlefield, illuminating the dark void in brilliant flashes of light. One of the smaller Void Eaters faltered, its form disintegrating into a cascade of energy. A cheer erupted from the crew, but Drake silenced it with a raised hand. "Stay sharp. This isn't over." As if in response, the largest Void Eater surged forward, its tendrils lashing out with renewed fury. One swept through an alien vessel, slicing it cleanly in two. The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as the ship's remains spiraled into the gas giant below. "They're retaliating," Thren said grimly. "Good," Drake replied, his voice cold. "That means we've hurt them." Another shudder rocked the Stormbreaker, and the air carried the sharp tang of heated metal as emergency systems kicked in. The Void Eater's tendrils were closing in, each strike more calculated than the last. "Commander, gravitational distortions are increasing near the anomaly," Irel called out. "Energy readings are off the charts." Drake's eyes flicked to the display, his mind racing. The Void Eaters weren't just reacting, they were regrouping. Whatever was at the anomaly's core was more than just a power source. It was controlling them. "Irel, mark those energy readings and prepare a retreat vector," Drake ordered. "Retreat?" Thren asked, startled. "We've done what we came for," Drake said. "We've seen how they fight. Now it's time to live long enough to plan our next move." The Stormbreaker banked sharply, leading the fleet away from the anomaly. The Void Eaters pursued for a moment before halting, as if tethered to their core. As the fleet escaped, Drake's mind lingered on what they had witnessed. The Void Eaters weren't just predators. They were strategists, testing their prey as much as they were being tested themselves. And whatever lay at the heart of the anomaly was no mindless force. It was watching, waiting, and learning. "Prepare the debrief," Drake said, his voice low. "And get me everything we have on that energy signature. If we're going to win this, we need to know what's in the heart of that beast." The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion, laden with the unspoken question that hung in every crew member's mind. What kind of intelligence could control monsters like these? And worse, what would it do next? Commander Alaric Drake sat in the Stormbreaker's war room, his thoughts heavy as he studied the energy signature captured from the anomaly. The laser plasma display projected the shifting patterns of gravitational waves, each undulating curve like a breath drawn by an incomprehensible entity. It was alive, deliberate, watching. The room was dimly lit, the soft blue glow of the display painting sharp lines on the faces of his officers. They sat in silence, the weight of the last battle etched into their expressions. The air carried the faint scent of overheated metal, a reminder of how close they'd come to destruction. Thren broke the silence, her voice quiet but steady. That wasn't just a defense, Commander. They let us leave. Drake's gaze didn't shift from the display. They didn't let us leave. They herded us out. We were too close to something they didn't want us to see. Lieutenant Urel frowned, leaning forward to study the patterns. If that's the case, then we were wrong to think they're just reacting. This, he gestured at the display, his brow furrowed. This is strategy. They're calculating risks, holding their resources back. They're planning. Drake's voice was as sharp as a blade. Then we planned faster. The war room door slid open, and Dr. Kalis Vryn stepped inside, her boots clicking faintly on the deck. The human xenobiologist had an air of restless energy about her, the corners of her sharp features betraying the hours spent poring over data. She carried a portable analyzer, its screen flickering with alien symbols that danced like firelight. "Commander," she began without preamble, "the energy signature from the anomaly. It's not natural." The room seemed to shrink around her words. Drake's gaze snapped to her, the intensity in his eyes enough to make even Iril stiffen. "What do you mean, not natural?" Drake asked, his voice low. Vryn set the analyzer on the table and expanded its display. The floating patterns of the Void Eater signals seemed almost symphonic, their rhythmic rises and falls uncomfortably deliberate. "I ran the readings against every known natural phenomenon," Vryn explained, gesturing to the data. "Gravity wells, stellar collapses, even theoretical constructs. None of it matches. The energy is directed, engineered." "Engineered by what?" Thren asked, her voice laced with unease. "Or by who?" Vryn corrected. She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the edge of the table. "It's old, older than the Council's records, older than most of the stars in this quadrant. Whatever created these things wasn't just advanced. It was godlike." The room fell into a suffocating silence, the weight of her revelation pressing on each of them like the pull of Arleth 9's gravity. Drake finally broke the stillness, his voice measured. "If they were engineered, then there's a reason. And if there's a reason, there's a weakness. We find it." Vryn hesitated. "Commander, if these things were created as weapons, and I believe they were, then what's controlling them now? Weapons need orders. Or they need freedom," Drake said grimly. Before anyone could respond, the ship's AI interrupted, its tone cool and detached. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the Aryan, flagship of the Zaltis delegation. Priority level 1. Drake exchanged a look with Thren, his expression darkening. "The Zaltis? They've barely spoken to us since the council meeting." "Perhaps they've changed their minds," Thren said, though her voice carried little optimism. "Patch it through," Drake ordered. The laser plasma display shifted to show a Zaltis ambassador. His crystalline form glimmered with faintly shifting hues, a visual representation of his emotions. Right now, they were a stormy gray, a warning. "Commander Drake," the ambassador began, his tone clipped and formal. "We have analyzed your findings and find your conclusions troubling. If these Void Eaters are, as you suggest, constructs, then the implications for the galaxy are catastrophic." "We've been living in catastrophe since they appeared," Drake replied coldly. "What's your point?" The ambassador's form darkened further, the shifting light within him pulsing like a dying star. "The Council's factions are fracturing. Some believe your theories. Others think this is another human attempt to exaggerate your importance. And some," his tone turned bitter, "are considering unilateral action." "What kind of unilateral action?" Drake asked sharply. The ambassador hesitated, his crystalline body flickering. "There are whispers of strikes on the anomaly without consulting the Alliance. If these factions act without coordination, the Void Eaters will annihilate them, and then us." Drake's fist clenched on the table. "Idiots! They'll trigger the next phase of whatever the Void Eaters are planning." "I agree," the ambassador said reluctantly, "which is why I've come to you. If humanity truly has the insight you claim, then it's time to prove it. Stop these fools before they destroy us all. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the war room in tense silence. Unilateral action, Thren muttered, shaking her head. They're desperate. They'll get themselves killed and drag us down with them. Drake straightened, his voice calm but cold. Not if we get there first. Yrel, plot a course to the Zalthus fleet's last known position. Vryn, I need every scrap of data on the anomaly cross-referenced with ancient records. Find anything that points to its origin. Vryn nodded, already pulling up the data on her portable analyzer. And the Void Eaters? Thren asked. And Drake's gaze was steel. They'll follow. They always do. The Stormbreaker moved through the silent expanse of space, its course locked toward a rendezvous point with the Zalthus fleet. On board, the crew worked tirelessly, their movements carrying a sense of urgency that bordered on desperation. Every report, every scan, every calculation carried the weight of lives yet to be lost. Drake stood alone in his quarters, staring at the heads-up display that filled one wall. It showed the anomaly again, its shifting patterns hypnotic and unnerving. He had seen countless battlefields in his career, but this one felt different. It wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight against something that should never have existed. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a moment of doubt. Who had created the Void Eaters? What had gone so wrong that they were now the galaxy's greatest threat? And most chilling of all, if the galaxy's brightest minds couldn't stop them, what hope did humanity have? Drake's reflection in the display stared back at him, a man caught between worlds, carrying the weight of an entire galaxy on his shoulders. He clenched his jaw, pushing the doubt aside. There was no time for fear. "Commander," Thren's voice came through his comm. "We're approaching the rendezvous point." Drake turned, his voice as steady as steel. "I'm on my way." As the Stormbreaker prepared to face whatever lay ahead, the questions loomed larger, unanswered, and gnawing. But one thing was certain. They weren't just fighting monsters. They were fighting the ghosts of a forgotten past, and the reckoning was only beginning. The Stormbreaker shuddered violently as it entered the outer rim of the anomaly's gravitational field, the ship's stabilizers straining to counter the erratic distortions that churned through the void. Alaric Drake gripped the armrest of his command chair, his knuckles whitening under the strain. Outside the viewport, the scene defied comprehension. Ribbons of light twisted and coiled in impossible patterns, bending in and out of dimensions that shouldn't exist. Space seemed alive, breathing, each pulse warping the stars like ink swirling in water. "Report," Drake ordered, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the bridge. Lieutenant Yrel adjusted the heads-up display, which flickered as it struggled to keep up with the anomaly's interference. "Gravitational flux is spiking every few seconds, Commander. Shields are holding, but they're taking a beating. Radiation levels are climbing as well. We're nearing the limit of safe exposure." "Safe isn't an option today," Drake said grimly. "Keep us steady and on course." The laser plasma display at the center of the bridge projected a three-dimensional map of the anomaly, with the Stormbreaker represented as a glowing blue dot edging toward the heart of the disturbance. Around it, the Void Eaters swarmed like vultures circling carrion, their tendrils weaving a deadly web that shifted with deliberate intent. "Commander," Thren called out from her station, her tone brittle with tension, "we've got movement. Void Eaters repositioning. They're closing in on our flank." "Divert power to rear shields," Drake ordered. "Yrel, deploy countermeasures. I want those things focused on the decoys, not us." Yrel's hands flew across his console, and moments later, a volley of drones launched from the Stormbreaker, each one emitting bursts of electromagnetic interference. The Void Eaters hesitated, their tendrils pausing mid-motion as if sniffing the air, before lurching toward the decoys. Drake watched them closely, his mind racing. These creatures weren't mindless predators. They were tactical, deliberate, learning. "Thren, keep an eye on their movements. If they adapt, I want to know before they make their next move," Drake said. "Yes, sir," she replied, her focus locked on her station. The air on the bridge was thick with tension, a charged stillness that pressed down on every officer like the weight of the anomaly itself. The faint vibration of the deck beneath their feet seemed to echo in their bones, a reminder of the forces at play outside. Dr. Kalis Vryn entered the bridge, her sharp eyes scanning the displays. She carried a portable analyzer, its screen glowing faintly with lines of alien data. "Commander," she began, her voice low, "I've cross-referenced the energy patterns with the ancient records we pulled from Zalthus archives. There's a match." Drake turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What kind of match?" Vryn's gaze darkened. "The records describe an artifact called the Shard of the Architects. According to the texts, it's a remnant of a civilization that predates all known species, a civilization that created weapons to control the fabric of reality itself." Drake's jaw tightened. "And you're saying this shard is inside the anomaly?" "Not just inside it," Vryn said. "It is the anomaly. The Void Eaters are drawn to it because it's their source of power, possibly even their origin." A heavy silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the faint beeping of monitors and the distant thrum of energy surges outside. The implications of Vryn's words were staggering. The Shard of the Architects wasn't just an artifact, it was the key to understanding the Void Eaters, and if they could harness it, it might be the galaxy's only hope for survival. "Commander," Thren interrupted, her voice urgent. "Void Eaters are regrouping. They're ignoring the decoys and converging on our position." Drake's gaze snapped to the display, where the tendrils of the Void Eaters were curling inward, their movements more coordinated than ever before. The anomaly's center pulsed like a beating heart, each wave of energy amplifying the creature's aggression. "They know we're after the shard," Vryn said, her tone grim. Drake rose from his chair, his presence commanding despite the chaos around him. "Then we don't give them the chance to stop us. Helm, take us deeper into the anomaly. Full power to forward shields. Iril, ready the gravitational disruptors. Thren, I need constant updates on their movements." The Stormbreaker surged forward, plunging into the heart of the anomaly. The bridge shook violently as the gravitational forces intensified, the ship's hull groaning under the strain. Sparks flew from an overloaded console, and the acrid scent of burned circuitry filled the air. Officers scrambled to stabilize the systems, their voices raised in frantic coordination. "Shields down to 40%, Yrel shouted, his hands moving rapidly across his console. "We can't sustain this much longer." "We don't need longer," Drake said. "We just need to get close enough." The anomaly's core came into view, a blinding sphere of energy that seemed to fold reality around it. The Shard of the Architects was no ordinary artifact. It was a massive crystalline structure, its jagged edges radiating light that shifted through the spectrum. It was beautiful and terrifying, a monument to a forgotten power. "Commander, the Void Eaters are closing in fast," Thren warned. "They're forming a perimeter around the shard." Drake's mind raced, calculating their options. "Yrel, deploy the disruptors around the core. Create a corridor. Anything to keep those things off us." "Aye, sir," Yrel said, launching the disruptors. The devices streaked toward the shard, emitting gravitational pulses that rippled through the anomaly. The Void Eaters recoiled, their tendrils writhing as the pulses disrupted their movements. "We've got a window," Drake said. "Helm, bring us in. Vryn, prepare a containment field for the shard. We're taking it with us." "You're insane," Vryn said, though there was no fear in her voice, only awe. That much energy could tear the ship apart. "It's a risk we have to take," Drake replied. "If we leave it here, the Void Eaters will keep drawing power from it. This is our only chance." The Stormbreaker moved closer to the shard, its shields flickering as the gravitational forces intensified. The bridge lights dimmed, the ship's systems straining under the load. "Containment field is ready," Vryn said, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. "Engage," Drake ordered. The field activated, encasing the shard in a shimmering barrier of energy. The bridge crew watched in silence as the shard's light dimmed, its power siphoned into the containment field. The Void Eaters howled, an unearthly sound that resonated through the ship's systems, a chorus of fury and despair. "They're reacting," Thren said, her voice tight. "Tendrils converging on our position." "Yrel, activate the disruptors at full capacity," Drake commanded. Buy us time to get out of here. The disruptors fired, their gravitational pulses creating a chaotic storm that threw the Void Eaters into disarray. The Stormbreaker turned sharply, its engines roaring as it began its retreat. "Commander, we've got the shard," Vryn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But they're not going to stop coming for it." Drake's gaze was fixed on the display, where the Void Eaters writhed in the distance, their fury palpable. "Let them come," he said, his voice cold and unyielding. "We'll be ready." As the Stormbreaker raced away from the anomaly, the bridge crew remained silent, their thoughts heavy with the knowledge of what they had unleashed. The shard was theirs, but the war was far from over, and deep in the Void Eaters waited, their hunger undiminished. The tension inside the war room felt like a coiled spring, wound impossibly tight and ready to snap. Commander Alaric Drake stood at the head of the table, his gaze fixed on the laser plasma display. The illuminated patterns of the Void Eaters' movements twisted and spiraled, a deadly ballet of logic and chaos. They weren't just drifting aimlessly. Their movements were deliberate, the perimeter around the anomaly tightening like a noose. "They're consolidating their defenses," Lieutenant Thren said, her voice tight as she pointed to the glowing trails of the tendrils on the display. "They've created a kill zone around the anomaly. Anything that tries to cross that boundary won't make it through." "They know we're coming," Drake muttered, his tone heavy. He rested his hands on the edge of the table, his posture tense but commanding. "And they're daring us to try." Dr. Kalis Vryn tapped rapidly on her portable analyzer, her sharp features illuminated by its glow. "It's worse than that," she said, her voice low but cutting. "The shard isn't just powering them, it's synchronizing them. Every Void Eater we've encountered is operating as part of a single system, and that system's core is the shard. If we don't disable it, they'll only get stronger." Drake straightened, his gaze shifting to the officers assembled around the table. "Then we disable it." "Commander, with respect," Irel began, his brow furrowed. "We're walking into a death trap. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and going up against something we barely understand. If we're wrong about any part of this plan—" "We won't be wrong," Drake cut in sharply. "Because we don't have the luxury of failure. This is it. Either we end this, or the galaxy burns." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Even Thren, who usually met Drake's intensity with her own, remained quiet, her gaze fixed on the shifting display. Finally, Vryn broke the silence. "I've been analyzing the shard's energy output," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "If we can disrupt its synchronization field, we might be able to break their coordination. Without that, they're just isolated predators. Dangerous, but manageable." "And how do we disrupt it?" Drake asked. Vryn hesitated, then gestured to the display. "The shard's energy field is tied to the gravitational distortions around the anomaly. If we overload those distortions, use their own gravitational waves against them, it could destabilize the shard long enough for us to neutralize it." Irel frowned. "Destabilize how?" "We're talking about forces strong enough to tear entire fleets apart." "Exactly," Vryn replied. "We turn the anomaly into a weapon, but we'll need to plant disruptors directly around the shard to do it." A heavy pause followed her words, the implications sinking in. It would mean sending a team into the heart of the anomaly, into the Void Eaters' territory. "I'll lead the strike team," Drake said without hesitation. "We'll take a shuttle in, plant the disruptors, and get out." "With all due respect, sir, that's suicidal," Thren said, her voice sharp. "There's no guarantee you'll even make it to the shard, let alone back out." "There's no guarantee of anything," Drake replied, meeting her gaze with steel in his eyes. "But I'm not asking anyone to do something I'm not willing to do myself." "Then I'm going with you," Thren said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Drake's expression softened slightly, a rare flicker of appreciation crossing his face. "Fine, but we keep the team small. Too many people will slow us down." "Commander," Irel interjected, "if you're going in, we'll need to keep the Void Eaters occupied. The fleet will have to engage them directly." Drake nodded. "You'll have command of the fleet while we're inside. Use every trick we've got, decoys, disruptors, anything to buy us time." Irel straightened, his usual doubt replaced by resolve. Understood, sir. Drake turned back to the display, the shifting patterns of the anomaly reflected in his eyes. This is the plan, he said, his voice steady. We hit them fast, we hit them hard, and we don't stop until that shard is neutralized. The final preparations began, the bridge and hangar alive with activity as the crew readied for the operation. Drake stood in the armory, securing the final pieces of his combat suit. The armor was sleek and reinforced, designed to withstand the extreme conditions of the anomaly. Beside him, Thren adjusted the straps on her gear, her usual confidence tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. "Ready for this?" Drake asked, his tone lighter than usual. Thren gave him a sidelong glance. "You don't ask me that kind of question, Commander. You know the answer." Drake allowed himself a faint smile. "Just making sure." The shuttle was a compact, rugged craft designed for infiltration. Its hull was reinforced with hybrid alloys, and its interior was cramped but functional. As the strike team boarded, the atmosphere inside was tense but focused. Everyone knew what was at stake. Drake took the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls. Thren sat beside him, her eyes scanning the displays. The rest of the team secured themselves in the back, their expressions grim but determined. "Shuttle ready for launch," Drake said over the comm. "Fleet is in position," Yrel replied. "We'll engage on your signal. Good luck, Commander." Drake keyed the controls, and the shuttle lifted off, slipping away from the fleet and toward the anomaly. The transition into the gravitational field was immediate and brutal, the shuttle bucking wildly as it pushed deeper into the distortion. "Stabilizers are struggling," Thren reported, her voice taut. "We're running on borrowed time." "Then let's not waste it," Drake replied. The anomaly's core loomed ahead, a chaotic storm of light and shadow. The shard pulsed at its center, its crystalline structure glowing with an intensity that seemed to draw the very fabric of space toward it. Around it, the Void Eaters swarmed, their tendrils weaving a near-impenetrable web. "Activating stealth field," Drake said, flipping a switch. The shuttle shimmered, its profile blending into the surrounding distortion. The maneuver worked, for now. The Void Eaters' tendrils writhed around them, but they seemed unaware of the shuttle's presence. Drake guided the craft through the chaos, his hands steady despite the turbulence. "Approaching the drop zone," Thren said. "We'll have to move fast once we're out." The shuttle landed on a jagged outcropping near the shard, its surface glowing faintly with the energy radiating from the core. The team disembarked quickly, their boots crunching against the crystalline terrain. The air around them was thick with static, each breath tasting sharp and metallic. "Plant the disruptors," Drake ordered, his voice low but commanding. "We've got 5 minutes, tops." The team moved with practiced efficiency, securing the devices around the shard's perimeter. The shard loomed above them, its light almost blinding up close. Drake felt its pull, an almost physical weight pressing against his chest, as though the shard was aware of their presence. "Disruptors in place," Thren reported. "Ready to activate." Drake raised his comm. "Yrel, we're set. Begin the diversion." Through the static-filled channel, Yrel's voice came through. "Understood. Fleet engaging now." The faint flashes of distant explosions lit up the anomaly's edges as the fleet opened fire, drawing the Void Eaters away from the shard. The ground beneath Drake's feet vibrated, the shard's energy reacting to the disruptors. "Activate them," Drake commanded. Thren pressed a button on her wrist console, and the disruptors came to life, emitting pulses that rippled through the anomaly. The shard's light flickered, its glow dimming as the gravitational waves around it began to collapse. The Void Eaters reacted instantly, their tendrils whipping back toward the core. "They're coming," Thren warned. "Fall back to the shuttle," Drake ordered. "We've done what we came for. Now let's get out of here." As they ran, the anomaly seemed to scream around them, the Void Eaters converging with terrifying speed. The mission wasn't over yet, and the hardest part was still ahead. The shuttle bucked violently as it raced away from the shard, the turbulence like an unrelenting tide crashing against fragile walls. Alaric Drake's knuckles tightened on the controls as the gravitational distortions clawed at the craft, pulling it toward the anomaly's core. Behind them, the Void Eaters swarmed, their tendrils lashing through the chaos with lethal intent. "Shields at critical!" Thren shouted, her hands darting over the console to reroute power. "They're closing the gap! Fast!" "Hold us together for 30 more seconds," Drake replied, his voice a razor-sharp edge cutting through the storm. "Iril, what's the fleet's status?" The comms crackled, and Iril's voice came through with a tense urgency. "Fleet's engaging the Void Eaters at the outer edge of the anomaly. We're drawing their attention, but they're not taking the bait completely." Drake's jaw clenched. The Void Eaters were prioritizing the Shard, their movements faster, more coordinated than anything they'd encountered before. It wasn't just desperation, it was strategy. They knew the Shard was critical, and they weren't going to let it go without a fight. "We need a stronger distraction," Drake said, his mind racing. "Thren, patch me through to the fleet." Her fingers flew across the controls, and moments later, the laser plasma display flickered to life, showing the scattered icons of the human and alien ships battling at the anomaly's edge. The screen pulsed with bursts of energy, each flash a testament to the chaos unfolding outside. "All ships, this is Commander Drake," he said, his voice cold and commanding. "Concentrate fire on the largest Void Eater cluster. Push them back and create a gap. If we can split their forces, we might stand a chance." "Understood, Commander," Iril replied. "But we'll take heavy losses if we press too hard." Drake's eyes flicked to Thren, who nodded grimly. "Do it. The mission comes first." The shuttle pitched again as another gravitational surge rocked it. The Void Eaters were closing in, their tendrils weaving a deadly lattice that threatened to engulf them. Drake's hands tightened on the controls, his focus unyielding. "Prepare the failsafe," he said to Thren. "If we don't make it back to the fleet, the Shard can't fall into their hands." Thren's gaze darkened, but she nodded. "Failsafe armed. If we go down, it all goes with us." The words hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder of the stakes. There was no margin for error, no second chances. The Shard was both their salvation and their greatest threat, and if it couldn't be secured, it had to be destroyed. The shuttle broke through the final wave of turbulence, emerging into the relative stability of the fleet's defensive line. The Orion loomed ahead, its sleek alien design a stark contrast to the human ships bristling with weapons. Drake guided the shuttle into the hangar, its landing gear groaning as it touched down. The team disembarked quickly, their boots striking the deck with purpose. The hangar was alive with activity, crew members rushing to reload fighters and repair damage as alarms blared in the distance. Drake wasted no time, striding toward the command deck with Thren and Vryn close behind. "Commander on deck," an officer called as Drake entered, the bridge crew snapping to attention. The laser plasma display dominated the room, its shifting patterns casting an eerie glow over the tense faces of the officers. "Report," Drake demanded. "Fleet is holding, but just barely," Irel said, his tone grim. "We've managed to push the Void Eaters back, but their coordination is improving. They're targeting our weakest points with brutal efficiency." Drake studied the display, his mind piecing together the chaos into something resembling a plan. The Void Eaters were adapting faster than anticipated, their movements tightening like a noose. But there was still a chance, a sliver of opportunity buried within the chaos. "Ural, redeploy the forward line," Drake said. "Pull the smaller ships back and concentrate fire from the battleships on the anomaly's perimeter. We need to keep them spread out." "And the Shard?" Ural asked. Drake's gaze hardened. "We deploy it." The bridge fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The Shard was their greatest weapon, but it was also their greatest risk. Its power could disrupt the Void Eaters' coordination, but if it fell into their hands, the consequences would be catastrophic. "You can't be serious," Thren said, her voice low but sharp. "If they get the Shard—" "They won't," Drake cut her off, "because we won't give them the chance. Vryn, can we amplify the disruptor's output using the Shard's energy field?" Vryn hesitated, her sharp mind racing. "It's possible, but it would be unstable. The feedback could destroy the Shard, and everything around it." Drake nodded. "Then we make sure everything around it is Void Eaters." The room erupted into a flurry of activity as the plan took shape. Technicians worked quickly to reroute power to the disruptors, while tactical officers coordinated the fleet's movements. The air was thick with tension, the faint hum of systems overlaid with the sharp voices of commands and reports. Drake stood at the center of it all, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. He had no illusions about the risks. They were walking a razor's edge, and one wrong move could cost them everything. But hesitation was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Commander, the shard is ready," Vryn said, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was saying. Drake nodded. "Begin the deployment. Yrel, signal the fleet to hold their positions. This will be messy." The shard was released into the anomaly, its crystalline structure glowing with an intensity that seemed to draw the very fabric of space toward it. The Void Eaters reacted immediately, their tendrils converging on the shard with a terrifying speed. "Activating disruptors," Vryn said, her fingers flying over the controls. The disruptors fired, their gravitational pulses rippling through the anomaly. The shard amplified the effect, creating a cascade of energy that sent the Void Eaters into chaos. Their movements faltered, their tendrils writhing as if in pain. "It's working!" Thren shouted, her voice cutting through the tension. "Keep the pressure on," Drake said. "We need to give the fleet time to regroup." The bridge shook violently as the Void Eaters lashed out, their desperation manifesting in erratic and devastating attacks. One tendril struck a nearby cruiser, tearing through its hull like paper. The ship exploded in a burst of light, its crew lost to the void. "Commander, we've got a problem," Yrel said, his voice tight. "The shard's energy field is destabilizing. We're running out of time." Drake's gaze flicked to the display, where the shard's glow was flickering, its power fluctuating wildly. They were at the breaking point, the line between victory and annihilation razor thin. "Prepare the failsafe," Drake said, his voice cold. "If it comes to it, we'll detonate the shard, but not until I say." The final moments of the battle unfolded in a blur of light and chaos. The Void Eaters were on the brink, their coordination unraveling, but the cost was immense. Ships burned, their wreckage spiraling into the anomaly, and the crew of the fleet fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Drake stood at the center of it all, his gaze fixed on the display. The plan was working, but the price was higher than anyone had imagined. And as the shard flickered one final time, he knew the end was near, one way or another. "Commander, the shard is collapsing," Vryn called out, her voice carrying a sharp edge of finality. The bridge was bathed in the flickering light of the laser plasma display, the chaotic readouts blurring as the energy readings spiked. The Void Eaters, once coordinated and unyielding, were unraveling, their tendrils spasming and twisting in confusion as the shard's synchronization field broke apart. "Then this is our moment," Alaric Drake replied, his tone resolute. His eyes locked onto the display, where the shard pulsed violently, its once unyielding crystalline form now splintered and bleeding light. Every surge threatened to tear the fabric of space around it, and with it the fleet that had risked everything to get this far. "Failsafe ready," Thren reported, her face pale but determined. The strain of the battle lingered in her sharp movements and the tightness in her jaw, but her hands remained steady. "Yrel, signal the fleet," Drake ordered. "Pull everyone back to safe distance. No stragglers." "Safe distance doesn't exist anymore, sir," Yrel muttered grimly as his fingers worked the console. "But I'll do what I can." Drake exhaled through his nose, his focus razor-sharp. "We're not dying here. Not today. Not like this." On the display, the shard trembled, its fractured edges splintering into jagged shards of energy. The Void Eaters screamed, not in sound, but in a reverberation that rippled through the sensors and the ship itself. It wasn't just noise. It was a primal, bone-deep force that made the crew feel as if the creatures were mourning something far older than themselves. "They're retreating," Vryn whispered, disbelief creeping into her voice. "The Void Eaters are breaking formation." Drake leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Not retreating, regrouping. They know what's coming, and they're not sticking around to burn with us." Thren turned to him, her voice low. "And if they come back? If we fail now, they'll be stronger next time." Then we don't fail, Drake said, steel in his voice. We finish this, here and now. The tension on the bridge was suffocating, each second dragging like a lead weight as the shard teetered on the edge of annihilation. The ship's alarm screamed, a cacophony of warnings about structural strain and failing systems, but Drake tuned them out. There was no room for hesitation. "Commander," Vryn said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "if the shard goes critical, the blast will create a gravitational shockwave. It'll tear through the anomaly, but it'll take us with it." Drake didn't flinch. "If we don't detonate the shard, the Void Eaters will regroup. They'll spread to every corner of the galaxy, every world, every home." He turned to the crew, his gaze hard. "This is the fight we've been waiting for, the fight we were born for. Humanity doesn't back down from impossible odds. We use them." Thren glanced at him, her lips twitching into the faintest shadow of a smile. "You know, Commander, you make it sound like we've got this figured out." "We do," Drake replied. "We survive." The shard pulsed again, the final crack splitting its core in two. Light spilled out, not chaotic but rhythmic, beating like the heart of something alive. For a moment it felt as though the entire galaxy had paused to watch. "Failsafe engaged," Thren confirmed, her voice carrying a weight that went beyond the action itself. Drake straightened, his presence commanding. "Vryn, set the countdown. Earl, open comms fleet-wide." The channel crackled to life, the faces of captains and officers appearing on the heads-up display. Battle damage marred their uniforms, and exhaustion clung to their expressions, but there was fire in their eyes. They weren't beaten yet. "This is Commander Drake," he began, his voice steady and clear. "We've fought harder and lost more than anyone could have expected. You've seen what these things can do, what they'll keep doing if we let them. But this is where it ends." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over them. "The shard is their lifeline, and we're cutting it. This isn't just a fight for survival. It's a fight for every world that comes after us, for every species that hasn't had to face them yet. We're not just Deathworlders anymore. Today, we're the ones who saved the galaxy." For a moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, the faces on the display nodded, grim determination replacing fear. "Countdown initiated," Vryn said, her hand steady on the console. 10 seconds. The shard's light intensified, its energy rippling outward in waves that twisted space like a storm churning the ocean. The Void Eaters recoiled further, their tendrils curling inward as if shielding themselves from the inevitable. "Fleet is clear," Earl reported, his voice steady despite the strain. "All ships out of the blast radius." 5 seconds, Vryn announced. Drake's gaze remained locked on the display where the shard shone like a dying star. This was the moment everything had led to, the moment where humanity's stubborn refusal to break would decide the fate of countless lives. 3. The shard began to collapse inward, its light consuming itself in a final furious crescendo. 2. Drake exhaled, his voice calm and unwavering. "It's been an honor." 1. The shard detonated. The explosion wasn't light or sound, it was force, a tidal wave of energy that rippled through the anomaly and beyond. The Void Eaters were caught in its grasp, their tendrils disintegrating like ash swept away by a storm. The anomaly itself collapsed, its gravitational distortions imploding in a cascade of brilliance. The shockwave struck the ship, throwing the crew against their restraints as alarms blared and systems dimmed. Drake gripped the console, his teeth clenched, as the ship was hurled through the collapsing anomaly. Then, silence. The ship drifted in the stillness of space, the chaotic maelstrom replaced by calm. The crew sat in stunned silence, the weight of survival settling over them like a blanket. The laser plasma display flickered back to life, showing the empty void where the anomaly had been. "Status?" Drake asked, his voice rough but steady. "Void Eaters, gone," Vryn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The shard took them with it." Earl leaned back in his seat, exhaling sharply. "We made it." Drake turned to the crew, his expression unreadable. "We did more than make it. We changed the rules." Thren gave him a faint smile, her exhaustion clear but tempered by pride. "You're going to put that on a plaque, aren't you?" Drake allowed himself the briefest chuckle. "Damn right I am." The bridge was quiet, save for the faint crackle of systems coming back online. The fight was over, but its impact would ripple through the galaxy for generations. As Drake stood at the center of the bridge, gazing at the void where the anomaly had once been, he felt the weight of their victory. Humanity had been underestimated, dismissed as reckless Deathworlders. But in the end, it was their resilience, their ingenuity, and their refusal to surrender that had saved the galaxy. "They'll remember this day," Drake said softly. "Not because we fought, but because we didn't stop fighting." And somewhere, in the silence of space, the galaxy began to heal.